My name is Isabel Bronson. I'm the Conservation Projects Coordinator at the Housatonic Valley Association, and I'm joined today by my offstage colleagues, Tim Abbott, HVA's Executive Director, and Julia Rogers, HVA's Conservation Director. So over the past 6 months, we've really been working on catalyzing and advancing our Follow the Forest initiative, and we're excited to kind of share the Follow the Forest vision with you today and also introduce what we're calling the Follow the Forest Rest of Road campaign, Critters Commute To. So this is a social change campaign targeted at altering motorist behavior to enhance wildlife protection, enhance the connectivity they rely on, but also enhance the safety of our communities across the northeastern United States. Quickly, who are we at HVA? Well, we're a regional land trust and watershed organization that spans the 2,000 square mile Housatonic watershed, so that encompasses the Berkshires of western Massachusetts, portions of eastern New York, and down through western Connecticut to the Long Island Sound. For over 80 years, we've been leaders in collaborative conservation and have served as trusted conveners in our community, and our staff are composed of technical experts who have experience advancing conservation from the local to regional scales. And about 8 years ago, we launched what we call the Follow the Forest initiative with a bold vision, one that not only supports the environmental health of the Housatonic watershed, but also stretches well beyond the borders to help protect and connect a forested wildlife corridor that spans the entire northeastern United States. So we envisioned a landscape that was more resilient to the impacts of our changing climate and one where wildlife could adapt to the impacts of climate change. We imagined a landscape where they could maintain the genetic diversity that's required for viable and thriving wildlife populations. One where they could access critical core forest habitat, large trunks of unfragmented interior forests, and one where they could also just access the essential resources needed for survival: food, water, and shelter. Follow the Forest is an ambitious vision and certainly one that we couldn't achieve alone. So we engage countless conservation partners and community members across a four-state geography of Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, and Vermont. We also work alongside other like-minded efforts such as the Staying Connected initiative, and together we're working to protect and connect core forest habitats, preserving a forested, climate-resilient wildlife corridor that stretches from the Hudson Valley all the way up to Canada. Our approach in realizing this vision combines traditional land protection as well as cutting-edge connectivity modeling from the Nature Conservancy and UMass Amherst, and we also integrate locally derived knowledge in the form of community science. And so we work with conservation partners to achieve our goal of protecting 50% of each core forest habitat and guiding and aiding in strategic land protection. And we also work with our partners to ensure that the habitat connectivity that wildlife require to thrive is present across the landscape. And while we'll continue to work with our partners on this strategic land protection front, what we really have been focusing on through the Peregrine Accelerator has been this aspect of connectivity. It's this connectivity that's the critical piece of the puzzle in ensuring our protected core forests aren't isolated islands within our landscape. It's how critters as small as the yellow-spotted salamander are accessing their upland forest habitat and their vernal pool breeding grounds. It's how the bobcat can move throughout the landscape to find new mates, and how moose can sustain home ranges of over 50 square miles. And however important we recognize connectivity to be, it's important to acknowledge that it's historically been missing in conservation, specifically here in the United States. Only about 3% of our currently protected lands are considered to be connected, and this number is likely much lower where we reside in southern New England, where population density is higher, and fragmentation kind of inhibits this even further. However, through Follow the Forest, we really seek to change this. Our approach to ensuring habitat connectivity first involved us mapping out what we call our habitat or wildlife linkages. These are areas that connect core forests, that cross roadways and contain multiple types of habitats and development. And they're pathways that are predicted to be acting as critical areas facilitating wildlife movement throughout our landscape. These linkages were drawn using that incredible connectivity modeling and were informed by the linkages that the Staying Connected initiative has outlined. However, our habitat linkages are still predictive. They're more representative of structural connectivity than they are functional connectivity. This is where community science comes in and locally derived data. So we use this knowledge to help on a very hyper-local scale inform and refine our habitat linkages. One fun example we have is we use community source data. We took to Facebook back in 2022 and we created the moose map on the upper corner of the screen. And we gathered observations of a single moose as it traveled from northwestern Connecticut to the Hudson Highlands. And this was all just done using observations that people posted on Facebook to help us really understand that functional connectivity. How are wildlife moving throughout our landscape? How is this moose traveling from northwestern Connecticut to the Hudson Highlands? We can then use this again to inform the location of our mapped linkages. And then we also have what we call our community science program, our wildlife linkage assessment program. And the biggest thing this program does is it assesses the individual roadways within our habitat linkages, helps us identify the barriers that wildlife face as they maybe travel from northwestern Connecticut to the Hudson Highlands, help us understand the individual barriers that roadways pose to different wildlife species. And this really sets the stage for us then to work with conservation partners to say, hey, how can we mitigate these barriers? And how can we work on achieving Follow the Forest's second goal of securing one habitat linkage between each core forest, ensuring it's durable and viable for a broad suite of wildlife species?
Thanks, Isabel, and hello, everybody. I am Tim Abbott. I have the great privilege of working with these fine people and many, many partners across the area that Follow the Forest is active. You just heard some really exciting technical reasons why we do this particular work. I'm going to put a little more of the qualitative into it and then talk about the problem that we now are trying to solve, which is represented by humanity. So we'll start with, this is the coolest idea we ever had. I can fundraise on this. We give it freely to our partners. They praise it. They use it at local scales, at regional scales, and beyond. It makes that really cool, very interesting scientific modeling that we referenced earlier intelligible and actionable where we live. When you're driving in a car, taking your kids to school, and you have been exposed to this, you start asking questions, or the person in the back seat usually does, and says, do you think that animals could cross here? And so they're already orienting away from screens, what's outside the window, and thinking about, oh yeah, there's quite a lot of tree cover here, and there's not a lot of houses, and there's good habitat on both sides. One suspects they would like to, could they? That conversation has meant that in some towns in northwest Connecticut, the entire town has been assessed by volunteers. And they have gone out and walked sections of road where we predicted there should be some way to get from those hills to that swamp. And they've looked at this, used a 4-page, very easy PDF. You could use crayon. And just and given us clear but subjective ratings for how passable is it, what sort of barriers do you see? Do you see evidence of animals that have tried and failed? Do you see evidence of animals that have succeeded? And this is critical because we have so many good tools for trying to make roads permeable, but we cannot do it at scale. And particularly in an area that is as fragmented and developed, we're not talking about vast expanses of single ownership land. We're talking about what I now have learned New Brunswick has. Lots of smaller landowners making decisions at the scale they control, not at the landscape scale, which we are starting to shift once we start seeing it in this way and talking amongst ourselves about it. That map is a case in point. Big green blob on the right side of your screen is the largest intact core forest in northwest Connecticut. That's Great Mountain Forest. Lots of it conserved privately and publicly. That land to the right is the largest inland wetland in the state. That's Robin Swamp. It has locally rare, regionally significant, biodiverse, dense habitat. And what's in between it is Route 7, which is a state highway that you could drive to Vermont if you wished to. And the place that seems the best linkage actually is that little filled-in beige area where there are no houses on either side, where there was one landowner on both sides, 300 acres. This, if you are being a traditional land protection person, is your eureka moment because you found the missing piece, right? Protected land north and south, protected land west, and it's just who the hell are these people? So we did what land trusts are good at. We asked the forester who was doing a really good job on that property, who owns it. Turned out, family in South Carolina. Great. Family in South Carolina who had been approached by the Nature Conservancy 30 years before to tell them how special it was and were waiting for the return call. So, great. We had some federal money. We had a state partner that wanted to add to that. That was done. That was conserved. Huge success. By our metric, that is a durable and that is a viable place for wildlife to move. It has everything except for an overpass or an underpass, which it's never going to get. And so we were really happy about that until a moose came down and got hit by a commuter at that spot 3 months after we saved it. Underscoring the point that we're missing something, and that's us. That's the fact that the rest of the road is where most of the action is. There will be, I am confident, because our partners are working on it and we're cheering them on, there will be one overpass over the Massachusetts Turnpike in the Berkshires that is passable for people hiking the Appalachian Trail and wildlife. One. There might be one more if we work with our friends in New York, somewhere between New York and Connecticut on Route 84. That's the maximum for a wildlife overpass in this whole region. There will be culverts and bridges that, as they are replaced, imagine terrestrial as well as aquatic passage in some key places that are part of this puzzle. But the vast majority of what we're looking at is that. And it's the state roads particularly, because on the slower local ones, you actually have some local control over that. If salamanders are crossing and you have a friendly town, you can talk about let's shut the road down. You can't do that with the Department of Transportation in Connecticut or Massachusetts easily. You have to prove some things. The problem is us. And to illustrate this, I'm going to give you two very brief stories and then give you the details of our exciting new initiative that builds off of that when my colleague Julia comes up. So the first is that on the way up here, I'm driving, Isabel's in the back, and Isabel sees what I did not see, which is Adirondacks are on one side of the road, and more trees going to Lake Champlain are on the other side of the road, and in the wetland that's on the passenger side is a swamp, and in the swamp is a tree, and in the tree is a porcupine. Isabel saw it. I didn't see it. And she was sharing this with me, and I was really excited. And then I said, usually the porcupines I see are dead. This one, however, is really close to a four-lane divided interstate highway next to a 6 million acre park. But it's using that spot. So the aha moment is it's the person in the back seat who's actually paying attention to what's on either side. It's not the driver. Driver's doing whatever the driver's doing, following a little blue line, singing, thinking about work, whatever. It's the one in the back. So that's the kids. That's why we need to be in the schools. That's why we need community solutions for this. Reconnecting. I'm listening to these deeply important accounts of reconnection in First Nation and Indigenous communities here. The rest of us settlers got to do that too. And many of us just don't even understand the patterns and processes going on in the built environment that we've created so we can connect. So we got to have a disruption to that. We've got to have things that happen that make our eyes and our brains reorient to what's happening on each side of the road at different times of year, at different times of day, and for different species. And at the extreme end of this, there's a reason for us to do that for our own health and safety. The moose collision I told you about before did not kill the driver, but another one recently did. Now, we are not swimming in moose in our part of New England, but we've got them. And in October, a young man on a motorcycle, traveling at very high speed, a beloved member of his community, hit a bull moose, and neither of them survived that. And it happened at a spot we would have predicted. And it happened at a time when moose are looking for mates. But nobody in the Berkshires is thinking about moose. that guy was thinking about speed, and it cost 2 lives. There's an opportunity to change us, not everywhere, but on a stretch of this north-south landscape that Follow the Forest focuses on. And for that, I'm going to have my colleague Julia talk.
All right, thanks, Tim. So I'm going to give you guys some of the nuts and bolts of what we're thinking about. And we hope that by 2035, we're really inspiring change across this 4-state region, reducing the quantity of wildlife vehicle collisions. You saw some of those stats nationally in the United States of how many animals are killed every year and how much it costs society. But at the end of the day, we're really talking about these critters, right? They're things that inspire all of us. When we talk about Follow the Forest, people love to tell me all about the wildlife they see in their backyard. And so it's about safety for us, and it's about those cute bobcats that we're all really excited to talk about. And we hope to do this by bringing together art, science, and communities, right? Because changing behavior is really hard, but maybe if we disrupt people's commutes, we really can do that. And we know we need to start somewhere small. We can't immediately change behavior across a 4-state region. So we want to start with a 3-year pilot project, again, using art and science to disrupt people's commutes. You can see on the screen here a couple of places where we've drawn inspiration, and I'll just walk through them quickly. On the far left are memorials for roadkill that a Dutch biologist logged on his commute over a period of time. And he made a sign for every animal that was killed on that stretch of roadway to really help people who also travel on that roadway see just how many animals, individual animals, are killed every day. In the middle on the left-hand side is a reflective moose from the Save People, Save Wildlife movement. They also have some reflective deer. This is out in Utah. And again, it's a reminder for folks that these wildlife are crossing our roadways and we need to be paying attention. And then on the right-hand side of the screen are a couple more locally grounded examples of folks trying to raise awareness for amphibian movement in our region, which in the northeastern United States, amphibians are probably the best example of a big migration that we have, right? Our movement is so different than how wildlife move out west. And people get really excited about the amphibians moving in the late winter and early spring at nighttime. And so we have both volunteers out on roadways helping notify drivers of those, and also school kids creating signage to hopefully inform drivers of what's happening underneath of our tires. As Tim mentioned, we want to start this pilot in a really focused stretch of our region that is also core to the Staying Connected initiative. So you can see this stretch of Route 7 highlighted on the map, and it connects Cornwall, Connecticut to Stockbridge, Massachusetts. It's critical for connectivity in our region in sort of a southwest, northeast concept. You can see the amount of green on that map, which are those large core forests that Isabel talked about, and it's a nexus for biodiversity. Route 7 is a busy stretch of roadway, not nearly as busy as the interstates that for some wildlife might serve more as a moving fence, but Route 7 has just enough traffic that the 2 moose Tim talked about were both hit on this stretch of roadway, and countless black bear, deer, and smaller mammals are hit regularly. So let's talk a little bit about what we're thinking about. We want to start with, we really want to be able to measure change in this landscape. So we'll start with community polling to understand what do folks know about wildlife movement and what are some of the things that might really change their behavior on this landscape. So we'll focus in and do that community polling, and at the same time, we'll continue some of these community science efforts we have and broaden them to do roadkill surveys and also traffic speed surveys, because we hope at the end of this, not only are we reducing wildlife vehicle collisions, but people are really starting to slow their speeds like they might do in school zones. At the same time, we'll be working to develop our campaign. We'll be building this coalition that's primed and ready of storytellers and artists to help us create really creative things that can disrupt people's commutes and get their attention, right? We all see the deer jumping across the roadway sign or the moose for the next 10 miles sign, and we never see the wildlife in those stretches of roadway. So we want to lean on the science that's looked at how do we create effective signage and the artistic community to build something bigger than that. We'll also be developing a strategic communications campaign, so it's not just art and sculptures and signage along roadways, but maybe it's tapping into billboards that already exist in this landscape. It's using media to really tell the whole story. And then a year from this spring, we hope to be launching that campaign. So putting the signs in place, placing the art, and allowing these things to be there for a full year so that we can really capture the breadth of seasonal wildlife movement in our landscape. Over this whole time period, we'll be engaging the community. We'll be inspiring people with that amphibian movement every big night. We'll be working with community scientists to continue our assessments of these linkages, and we'll be working in local schools to really inspire the kids and families to be paying attention to wildlife movement. And after the full year of that pilot campaign, we'll again do assessments to really see if we've made a measurable change. We'll repeat the community polling that we plan to do at the beginning, and we'll do additional roadkill monitoring and traffic speed surveys to say, did we make a measurable impact? And we hope that all of this can then inform a bigger four-state movement so that we can take our lessons learned from this pilot and translate it across communities in the Follow the Forest corridor. And we want it to have a big impact. We want to really shift the public's understanding of wildlife movement and wildlife needs on these landscapes. We know that people in our region are excited. We have the return of bobcat and black bear and coyotes on our landscape that are getting people talking, and we really need them to see their needs on this landscape and not just so that they're in our backyards. We want to engage hundreds of people who are now inspired to see us as part of nature and not separate from it. As I've said, we want to reduce both traffic speeds in key areas and also the quantity of wildlife vehicle collisions. And we want to build a regional toolkit that our partners across the four-state region can utilize and learn from so that it's not just this pilot, it doesn't end with the pilot, but it really gets to be broader across the region. We estimate that just for the pilot, it'll cost about $335,000 across a suite of tools, including staff time to move the project forward, driver behavior assessments, getting our messaging out in the media and building that messaging campaign, engaging with consultants so that we're doing this in a focused scientific method, and also installing some pilot wildlife detecting road crossings. We don't fully have the sources for this funding identified. We estimate that the vast majority of this will be through individual private donors and private foundations, and that maybe we can source a little bit of it from state and federal funding. But we're very much open to ideas for funding this project. And I want to bring it back to probably a story that many of us heard as kids or read as kids, the Make Way for Ducklings book, that as we've been talking about this, Make Way for Ducklings just sort of made all of us smile, right? If you read this book as a kid, it's something that brings back memories for all of us. And we sort of want to be Make Way for Ducklings across the region, right? It's not just about the little ducklings, it's about all of the species that we care about. But we really have to be thinking about wildlife on our roadways as we're driving, because we can make so many interventions, but at the end of the day, wildlife in our region move in a very dispersed fashion. And we want to be able to support that, right? Land conservation and protecting big spaces is all about having wildlife continue to thrive on this landscape. And a piece of that puzzle is our behavior and how we choose to drive. So with that, we'll open it up for discussion and questions, and thanks for listening to us.
Thanks so much for this. This was really interesting. We're on another project that we're working on. We're really starting to have conversations about a similar type of stuff in terms of reducing or changing motorist behavior and also wildlife underpasses and overpasses in the Chignecto Isthmus area, where I live, but also we do quite a bit of work And one thing that I wanted to kind of throw out there, just because you were talking about amphibians, is like a lot of what we've talked about recently with that project team is shifting the focus. For a lot of years with work that our partners have done in the isthmus, it's been around terrestrial, like large terrestrial mammals, so moose in particular. And so how are you kind of conceptualizing that kind of engagement piece around getting people to think smaller and think about all those different species that are using roadways and crossing roadways? And because I feel like at least where we are, there is that gap in kind of understanding. And particularly when it comes to the social cost of wildlife collisions, obviously it's, from a human perspective, quite a bit lower if we're running over a salamander than hitting a moose.
Yeah, I think you identified one of the biggest challenges, right? Is that it's easier to encourage people to think about the large critters that are going to result in damage to our vehicles or potentially injuries or fatality to us. But to encourage someone to think about the little amphibian that they don't even know they're driving over is a much harder challenge. I hope that we can get to a place where many of our communities are closing roadways, the small local roadways that are critically important for some of the rare salamanders in our region. There's no reason why we couldn't imagine closing that roadway to local traffic on big nights. And maybe that's our solution for some of those much smaller critters that, can we really... One of the things I constantly think about with this idea is we have tried for years now to encourage people to not use their cell phones while driving. It's a really tough ask. And if you compare that to trying to convince someone that maybe they need to think about amphibians when they're driving, is this even really possible? And so I think part of that is the different solutions that we have to have for the different species of wildlife. But what we've also seen is people get really excited about Big Night in our region. There's been a concentrated effort for collecting data in the Hudson Valley of New York for many years now, where volunteers go out and they collect data on the number of live and the number of dead amphibians every Big Night. And there's such a movement and such an excitement about that because, again, it's seeing nature in action in ways that we don't usually see it. So I think some of that community excitement can be built into it too. I don't know.
So I saved that guy. All right, that's one of 120 spotted salamanders I moved on a single night at one spot in our area, and that one posed, so I got a good picture. So I got a tat, which allows me to sort of wear on my sleeve, if we're going to carry that analogy a little further, why that is so vitally important to me that I was willing to modify my body to advertise it. Right. You see a lot of dead amphibians on a Big Night. So when I introduce people out, and it's one of those timed events, right? I can't tell you it's going to be March 8th until March 8th. And even then, I got a phone tree for 20 people, and it's only 20. And I say, I think this is the night, so get your reflective vests on. And then if it is, then I hope I have cellular service at the place I'm at. But you encounter all of the tragedy and triumph on that night, and you can see the only intervention that's upping the odds, and it really is the salamanders because there are many, many more frogs, but is the fact that we happen to be on that stretch of road that night. And that's a state road that isn't going to get closed. The ones I worry about are the mid-sized mammals and the larger turtles, because in the mid-sized mammals case, nobody's stopping for a skunk. In January, where we are, the foxes are out because they're looking for love. And the skunks are doing that in the spring. And so it is that, what can you expect in the hours on either side of dusk and dawn, and why should you maybe chill out a little when you're driving? That's going to be the hardest shift. That's even more disperse. There is a rattlesnake alive today because I stopped traffic. I couldn't have planned when that particular snake wanted to come down off of that mountain and go and eat mice in the wetland down below. But I did know where the mountain was and where the den was, and so it was actually on my mind when I happened to see what was in the road. I need more people like that who aren't interested in poaching the snakes or killing them. And so those are generational changes. The problem with our ambitions is scale and the myriad factors that go into wildlife movement. We have to simplify it. But we did change our behavior on invasive plants. We did change it on throwing trash out the window, you know. So social smoking is no longer acceptable in most parts of where we live. So you know, one can reasonably assume we can affect some change in the communities where we are, but it's gonna have to be a message that I don't have today, which is why we need partnerships, not just with scientists, but with behavioralists and with advertising people and with folks in the community saying, boy, you know the thing I really want to see it more of? It's that thing. And we just don't know. So it's going to be a big integrated net.
I wanted to just thank you three for just a really fantastic presentation. And although I have some awareness of the initiative, you basically blew me away with this. So a couple of things I'm just wondering is about the budget, and I'm wondering, is that per year? Because 3 years, it seemed like given the fact that you're an organization with all these other responsibilities, and this is this new thing, can you pull it off with 335? Is that per year?
We're imagining the 335 is for the 3-year pilot.
Okay.
Open to be negotiated on it, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that,
Yeah.
William, and we can talk. We are going to hire an environmental educator this year. It's going to be the one new hire that we do this year. And I get to make that choice because now I'm the boss, so hooray.
Yeah.
But for those of you who don't know, I worked at HVA for a very, very long time and am now the executive director starting in July. So that's cool, right? That means that when good ideas like this come up, we can make some investments. Have much of the funding, but not all of it, identified for that position. That individual will help us shape this and other things, which is great. And we have a robust partner network that will do some of that lifting and doesn't have to be paid, has to have materials and training and an opportunity to run for it. A third of that is where the pickup truck hit the moose between the protected lands. That's the one spot where some combination of motion detecting, maybe using TNC's animal AI-assisted programming to determine that it wasn't a tree that fell, it was a large creature moving toward the road, and fencing might even be possible in our area since we helped the state protect both sides of it. All we got to do is convince Connecticut DOT that this is a good idea, and that will take a while. But you're probably right that we should think a little bit more robustly about what it needs. But if we had this, we could make a really good stab at it.
Yeah, and just wanted to follow up with a comment, is that I really think HVA, I mean, you all are an example of you developed an initiative on connectivity, you focused, like everybody else, on core forests and linkages, but ultimately you came up with what is the real problem, and you're now going after that real problem. So I just want to honor you as an organization, just one organization, you're tackling something that is a problem for all of the world, really. And you're trying to crack a nut that other people have not been able to do or not even addressed. So I just want to honor the fact that you guys are all in on this initiative and you're all in on finding a solution. And I think that's a very important story to tell in your fundraising.
Yeah, thanks so much, John Peterson, Network for Landscape Conservation, and maybe picking up on what William was speaking to. I think one of the often overlooked impacts and values of collaboration is that opportunity for creativity, and I think that's what William's telling that story, right? You started somewhere and you've evolved through creativity of partners, and so maybe the question I would be keen to hear you all reflect on is thinking of the history of the partnership and collaboration that has been Follow the Forest and how that has evolved as you've thought about the evolution of the work and where you see those opportunities for intervention. And what does that look like at this juncture as you think about, you're a land trust, Tim, You spoke to this already a little bit, very superficially. You don't know this. You don't know the message. You don't.
Yeah.
But how do you think about the ecosystem of relationships that will enable you and position you to dig into this issue from this vantage point that you're moving to? How have you seen the evolution of your collaboration over time, and what does that look like moving forward?
A long time ago, every land trust in Northwest Connecticut only thought about its own mandate. And we got steamrolled by well-financed development projects back in the era of irrational exuberance in the early aughts. And a combination of the Trust for Public Land and the Housatonic Valley Association sponsored an effort called the Litchfield Hills Greenprint, which is one of the early RCPs, Regional Conservation Partnerships. That's how I got to know William. I was hired to run that. And it changed the culture of how land protection happened in our region. It became collaborative, strategic, well beyond the boundaries of individual mandates, but people with shared orientations thinking about it. And because I had come to it from a community-based conservation background in Southern Africa and with the Nature Conservancy, I saw the potential for that to generate new innovative ideas and to be an incubator and a center of sort of thoughtful, community-based, interactive problem solving. And it did, and it spawned a bunch of stuff, one of which was Follow the Forest. And that's a really strong engine. There's some creative finance that came out of it too, and some other things, and that's good. That's what a high-functioning regional conservation partnership could be capable of doing. And we just stepped another huge leap outside of our comfortable skill set to say, if we're going to do interactive problem solving and learn from others and people who don't necessarily call themselves land trusts, and the people who called this their ancestral homelands, who were just beginning to get to know, and lots of other people, then it's got to be with that expectation that we're going to generate actionable ideas that shift things and have greater impact. And it's that faith in structured, bottom-up problem solving. And it does have to be structured, and you do have to find ways of filtering it. But that's kind of the special sauce, and that's what we've been doing.